We intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms or by superior power. They're not easily convinced.
These points are located on this map showing the Gulf of Tonkin, South China, North Vietnam.
As an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. Mr. Walter Grant, Guide.
I have asked the commanding general, General Westmoreland, what more he needs to meet this mounting aggression. He has told me, and we will meet his needs. I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division and certain other forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately. Additional forces will be needed later, and they will be sent as requested.
The smallest possible cost in American lives. We think the present tactics are best suited to those two objectives. As you know, we have lost about 500 aircraft attacking lines of communication.
Just keep it going. This is Red Crown on guard. Brown, a 6-0. You come up 358.
The Republic F-105 Thunder Chief was the first supersonic tactical fighter bomber developed from scratch to defend the United States from any potential World War Armageddon threat. It would soon be tested and called upon for a faraway place no one had ever heard of: Vietnam. This sparkling silver marvel was rapidly mobilized to Southeast Asia to stop the global spread of Marxism and keep the Cold War from going hot. The Department of Defense estimated the communist aggression in Vietnam could be suppressed in 4 to 6 weeks with minimal loss. As the losses began to mount, the Thud sparkling silver soon had to be changed to camouflage, as the F-105 bore the brunt of an ideological proxy war between 3 superpowers.
Late '64, we ended up going on an Operation Boonshoe to Korat, Thailand. It was a joint exercise mission with the Army, the Navy, and other flight forces in the Southeast Asia. Little did we realize we were just running a practice mission for what was going to come up in the next year. Again, late '64, we ended up deploying back to Korat to do clandestine missions in Laos, mostly looking for the Ho Chi Minh Trail, escorting 101 reconnaissance airplanes, and doing quite a bit out of Da Nang in South Vietnam, out over the Gulf of Tonkin, escorting C-130s and B-47s, who were ELANT airplanes. They were flying up and down the coast, collecting electronic data from the North Vietnamese. That was a very boring mission. We put 4 airplanes up to just escort a C-130 or a B-47 up the Gulf, 2 on 2, just going back and forth across them and getting very disorientated while we were doing this. And at the end of your tour, your 2 hours, we'd go back to hit a tanker and do it again. Then at about 4-hour point, the next flight of 4 would come up to replace you. If by chance that flight of 4 that was coming up was short a man, you had to stay with them. So you could put a good 6 and 7 hours in, just back and forth, back and forth. I used to tell gentlemen, I said, this could be very exciting because we had to have no idea if they're going to put MIGs up from China, which is Hainan Island was right here, or from North Vietnam. Well, one of the 104 pilots, as I said, at high noon, after doing all this with a little bit of confusion in your mind, you might pick the coast of Hainan Island up as the coast of Vietnam and go the wrong way. Well, he did go the wrong way. And he slipped in over there, and the Chinese shot him down, and he spent the war as a guest of the Chinese. After we did that, our first missions were going to be our first clandestine organized strike mission in the war with the 105 would be in January of 65. When I say organized, we had a lot of sporadic one-on-one gun interdiction missions periodically, but this was going to be one with F-100s, F-105s, a pre-strike recce flight, refueling, search and rescue forces. So it was a major operation for the first strike, and that was in January of 65. And we took down the Ban Can River Bridge in Ban Ban Lao, somewhere slightly east of the Plain de Jars. It was one of the many routes for the Ho Chi Minh Trail that would become very popular. So I got to fly on the very first day of combat operations, of organized combat operations in the war in Southeast Asia. I picked up 17 missions in Laos that were non-counters. I didn't get credit for those because we weren't there. So at the end of that, Thailand had not given us authority for offensive strikes out of Thailand, so we would go over to Da Nang, load up the airplanes at Da Nang in South Vietnam, and fly that combat mission. So our first combat mission was an eye-opener. We had 8 from the 44th, 8 from the 67th Attack Fighter Squadron, both out of Kadena, and of 2 flights of F-100s that were going to be flak suppression. As we got into the area, we had one combat pilot with us at the time, Larry Garino, who'd flown Spitfires in World War II, flew P-51s over Hanoi in 1945, and was now flying with us as a flight lead, Larry Garino. So someone called out, there's a low scatter deck down there. And Larry said, young man, that's not clouds, that's flak. So we had our first look at defenses on a target in January 65. We took the bridge out, but in the process of doing that, we lost an F-100, a 105, and had a 101 shot up pretty badly. This is an eye-opener for first day. All in all, it was all our own fault. We were green. We had no idea exactly what that operation was going to entail and how to get away properly. And we recovered all the pilots from that. We recovered them back to base. Time went on now, and as we moved into 65, they started doing strikes in Rolling Thunder in North Vietnam.
As the F-105 began to fly missions in Southeast Asia, the United States Air Force demonstration team, the Thunderbirds, keeping with its tradition of displaying the most advanced fighters of the age, commenced its transition from the F-100 to the F-105.
In 1964, the Thunderbirds were going to transition from the F-100s Cs they were flying into the F-105, and so they acquired a handful of F-105B models. Now, that's not the all-weather model. That's just was sort of day fighter bomber. So they got the F-105Bs, and they were developing a show. There was a new man on the number 2 position on the left wing, and they were putting on practice shows. I got to see some right at Nellis because I was an IP there at the time. And the show, if it had gone on, it would have been a super show, because with the 105B, they took the gun out, they took some of the excess weight out. It was a real performer, and they were putting on a show about the same distance from the audience that the F-100 Super Sabre show was put on. But because the airplane was so much larger and noisier, the show felt like it was in your lap and bigger than life. But they only had about 6 shows that they put on, and they were coming into Hamilton Air Force Base up in California. And as they came in, they did a 4G. Well, the airplane was modified so it could pull a lot of Gs. Anyway, they snapped these Gs on the airplane, pitching up to downwind to land singly. And Gene Devlin was on the left wing. And as he snapped the Gs on the airplane broke just behind the cockpit at a bulkhead, and it broke and blew up, and Gene was killed. The airplane was later found to have a design flaw in the bulkhead piece just behind the cockpit. And the 105Ds did not have that particular flaw, but the Bs did. But in the meantime, they grounded the entire fleet.
There was a much more important and looming threat. Affectionately known by its air crews as the Thud, The F-105 would soon bear a huge burden in an ideological proxy war between three superpowers. The largest single-seat, single-engine fighter bomber in history would go on to make more airstrikes in North Vietnam than any other U.S. aircraft, but at a price. It also suffered excessively high losses. A new type of aerial warfare, unlike anything in the history of war, had emerged, and the F-105 Thud was tasked with eliminating the new threat. For those flying missions up north, the battle space suddenly changed when the SA-2 surface-to-air missile elevated the war to a much more personal level. A weapon locked on, and directly targeting a specific aircraft made it much more personal than the common barrage fire of AAA guns. This Mach 3.5 flying telephone pole with a 50-pound proximity-fused high-explosive warhead was a lethal threat to the Thud.
On July 24th, 1965, I was flying in a four-ship, and we were up north, way north, attacking Dien Bien Phu ammo storage area. After that mission, as we were returning back to home base, our F-4 MiG cap, call sign Leopard Flight, got hit by a SAM. They were the first SAM shoot-down of the war, killing the backseater in Leopard 2, and the pilot was taken prisoner. This opened up the door to finally get authorization to go after the SAM sites. We stood down for a couple days trying to regroup and figure out what's the best way to attack the SAMs, since it had never been done before. On July 26th, we got the tasking order that we were going to hit all 7 known SAM sites. And I was tasked, along with one other pilot, to the evening of the 26th, mission plan the attack. Worked on the mission planning, drawing up maps late into the night. In fact, it was midnight when they finally released me to go get some crew rest, some sleep, before the next day's early mission. The next morning, we got up early for the mass mission briefing, and then we broke up into our own individual flight briefs. Before we got very far along, somebody stuck their head in our briefing room and said, "Hold it, everything's on hold." It turns out that Secretary of Defense McNamara felt that the move to attack all the SAM sites was too drastic and too much of a escalation of the war, and he had convinced President Lyndon Johnson to back off and authorize only attacking the 2 suspected sites that shot down Leopard Flight. So we had to go back to the drawing board and replan the missions to just attack those 2 sites. We planned on a 100-foot approach to the target because intel had given us the impression that the SAMs had a much greater capability than they really did. And we felt that the only successful way to avoid them was to go in as low as possible. Walking out to the aircraft, again, we were all very nervous. As we took off, everything got back into its normal pace. We go out and hit the tanker. But then the anxiety built up again as we started getting warning calls that the SAMs were up. We were briefed that we would be getting warnings of whether the SAMs were up or not. The code name was Bluebells Are Singing if the SAMs were radiating. If they weren't, if they were not operating, it would be Bluebells Are Silent. The first warning calls came as we were on the tanker, and that really jacked up the anxiety again. And then as we got off the tanker, started proceeding inbound to the target, it became like a cat and mouse game with the calls alternating between singing and not singing. I was in the 5th flight of 6 flights of 4 that were attacking SAM Site 7. We heard the first distress call. Number 2 in the first lead flight was hit, and we could hear lead encouraging him to stay in the aircraft as long as he could, and gave him the call, "You have to get over the next ridge, stay with it." Then we heard that awful beeper sound, knowing that he had ejected. He landed in the river right by the target, disappeared in the water, and was never seen again and was the first fatality of the mission. A few minutes later, we heard a second call. Again, number 2. This time the third flight got hit. And we could hear his wingman screaming for him to eject. I was number 2 in the 5th flight of the 6 flights going against SAM Site 7. And I remember for a moment there, I had the urge to key the mic button and say, Clipper 4, how about changing places with me? But I didn't think the intended humor would be appreciated under the circumstances. At 100-foot altitude, the terrain was going by awful quick. We're approaching our turning point to go down the Red River Valley, which pointed directly to the target. It was going to be a 120-degree turn into me, and there we are at 100 feet. So that meant that as we turned, I would even get down lower in order to keep the flight visible. So I figured I really needed to give them the room to turn into me, so I backed away so that I'd be able to keep them in sight. Approaching the final run-in heading, I slowly rolled out and was pleasantly surprised when I looked over and we were in perfect formation. We started picking up ground fire during the turn, and it was all bursting above us. But that forced us even lower, and next thing you know, we're approaching 50 feet and still descending. And I estimate that my lead must have gotten down to about 20 feet. And he was so low that the rest of the flight actually stacked higher on him. We couldn't stack the way we normally do because of being scared that we'd get drug off into some obstacle in the terrain there. Again, being separated only by 1 to 2 ship lengths or widths, you have to focus on your lead, so you're flying off him, and you're not looking out the front window. But every once in a while, I would take a quick peek out the front just to make sure there wasn't any high obstacle in my way. We were in this wide valley. The sky was a beautiful blue, but off in the distance, I could see 2 smoke columns from the preceding flights attacking the SAM site. As we approached the initial point, lead climbed up to 50 feet and rocked his wings, signaling that we needed to get into close fingertip because we had been tasked ridiculously by higher headquarters to drop in close formation like an air show. Their thought process was concentrating all the weapons in a dense area, but it was not a way to attack a target. Since we were flying in close fingertip, we weren't able to use our own sight picture, so we had to release when lead called for release. And as we were approaching the target, out of my peripheral vision, I could see the target coming up. When I heard lead start calling, he called out our call sign, "Ramblers ready, 3, 2, 1, pickle." And pickle was the call to release our weapons, which we did. And he had briefed that he was going to give me the lead as soon as we released our weapons, because the second SAM site being attacked was only 3 miles down the road from where we were dropping, and the Karat task force was attacking from the south, which meant that our flights were converging, and there was a great danger of having a midair.
I was flying number 4, and my friend that was leading the flight was the best man at my wedding, who also we lost several years later. He was shot down in Vietnam. He was briefing the flight on what we were going to do, and he said, after we drop our bombs, our tank bombs, our napalm cans, he was going to call us and tell us when to break and to leave. And I said, well, when you do it, Art, don't forget to tell Vic to go first. That way we won't be in a formation flying. We'll be single. And he said, okay. So we got down. He was going to say, Vic, I'll tell you when to go. And when we got there, and he said, Vic, and then Vic was gone. I mean, he just left. It was amazing. I laughed like hell, but it happened.
So I was briefed that I would be given the lead as soon as it's released. The humorous aspect of this is to again show you how we were all so tensed up and with all this anxiety, is during the briefing, lead very professionally told me, Vic, as soon as we release, I'm going to say, Rambler 2, you have the lead, and take the lead. Well, when it came time to give the call, he dispensed with a call sign, and all I heard was, Vic! And I knew what was going to follow was, you take the lead. I didn't even wait to hear that. I yanked hard and broke right, and they followed me, and we made a real tight turn back to the southwest to avoid crossing the flight path of the Karat flight.
And then of course, number 4 followed him all around, and we got there going out. There was a mountain between myself and the number 3 man. I had to go up and over and back down on the later, and we finally made it home all right.
I was breathing hard. In fact, it was funny, is another call on the radio. As we were approaching the target, somebody made the call, let's get the hell out of here. And that poor individual, he must have been so tense that either his mic button got stuck or he froze with his thumb on the mic button, because after that, we heard nothing but heavy breathing for a few seconds. Kind of gave me a little bit of relief to realize that I wasn't the only one breathing hard.
And then I remember when we got on the ground, the guy came up to the airplane and said, can I give you something to drink? I said, sure, I'd love it. He handed me a glass, and I just drank it. I didn't know what it was. Turned out to be cognac. So we had a great time, but that was the end of that particular mission. But it was a mission that I learned to fly many times after that. But after that later, Vic got shot down, and he was sent back to the States, and I was sent back to the States to become a Wild Weasel pilot. That's where this jacket came from. That was what I did, was fly over North Vietnam as a Wild Weasel pilot and to attack SAM sites.
As devastating and disastrous the first surface-to-air missile strike mission was, the blame did not lay at the feet of the brave pilots, but at the feet of incompetent politicians micromanaging the battle space. Of the 46 F-105s that attacked the 2 SAM sites that day, 6 were lost, with 3 pilots killed in action, 2 captured, and 1 rescued. From a North Vietnamese perspective, the mission went according to their plan and was a total victory for them. Knowing the United States would retaliate once they successfully employed their SAMs, the North immediately had removed the SAMs and associated equipment from the firing sites and replaced them with fake missiles constructed out of bamboo and bamboo matting. Within 24 hours, the sites were vacated and turned into flak traps to lure the Thud Pilots into their own shooting gallery of over 130 AAA guns. Despite having updated reconnaissance photos taken indicating the SAM sites had been vacated and turned into flak traps, Robert McNamara was adamant the mission had to continue, or North Vietnam would achieve victory and view the United States as nothing but a paper tiger. Despite mission failure, the lessons learned from Spring High led to the genesis and development of tactics and equipment that allowed U.S. forces to operate in a SAM environment. The birth of a new aerial warfare mission quickly emerged, and the Wild Weasels were formed to effectively combat the SAM threat.
We were the 3rd attempt to destroy a SAM missile site in North Vietnam. The 2 previous attempts had ended up in an utter disaster. Lieutenant Commander Trent Powers flew his Navy A-4E over from the Oriskany aircraft carrier to our base in Thailand. Commander Powers had a magical black box, and this black box would point to a SAM that was in the search mode. The Air Force didn't have anything like that, and that's why he came to lead us on a destruction mission. We call it the hunter-killer mission.
Our bombing objectives, I believe, can be very distinctly...
We worked out the strike details. Trent wanted to go across the target level and do a level bombing. We wanted to do a pop-up and then a dive bomb. And we said, well, Trent, you're in first, you'll be out of the way, so no problem. That'll work for both of us. We took off, we refuel, we get up to North Vietnam, and the whole place is overcast. Trent easily could have aborted. No one would have criticized Trent if he would have aborted, but Trent didn't abort. He gave the rock the wing sign to join into tight formation. So 4 thuds on his left wing, 4 thuds on his right wing into tight Vic formation. He lowers the nodes into the clouds.
Cougar Zebra, how's the weather look up there? That has multiple guns, all quads in the front. Super looks like it runs just short of the target. You're kind of hazy.
We broke out in the Red River Valley, the Delta. We go down to treetop level. We're strung out now, no more formation. We're going too fast, we're maneuvering. We're right down, honestly, as close to the ground as we could get. We're doing 500 knots indicated to avoid AAA. Because the lower you go, the faster you go, the harder it is for them to hit you. I did take several hits, and I had some annoying warning lights going off in the cockpit, and it was a real temptation to abort, and I just didn't want to miss this. Now, Trent's magic black box only pointed to the SAM when the SAM was in the search mode. So effectively, we were the goats tethered out into the open to draw the lion out into the open for the kill. Trent radioed, I've got him on the nose. I'm starting my run. As I watched Trent go across the target level, I was doing about 600 knots, an afterburner nipped up to about 8,000 feet to roll in, and as I saw him go across the target, he was literally disintegrated. And I remember saying in my mask, oh shit, I don't want to do this. I rolled in, established the dive bomb, released, the bomb's on the target, and I pull off. I had encountered withering gunfire during that whole dive bomb run. But I got the bombs on the target, and it was the first SAM destroyed in the North Vietnam War, October of 1965. I pull off the target. I thought I was going to have to eject with all these mechanical problems I had. So I made a call on the blind. I'm going to try to get to the water over Haiphong so people know what is going on. If I can eject over the water, there's a good chance that I can get picked up. As I headed for the water, I was right down as low as I could go. I was at afterburner. I was doing 810 knots indicated, which is the maximum speed before the canopy begins to melt. So almost 1,000 miles an hour. And as I was coming across very low, I passed a Navy Crusader, and I had a little bit more speed, and we were not on the same radio frequency, so we just kind of gave each other a wave. It was absolutely bizarre. I made it out over the water. The thing is still flying. I think I'm going to stick with the bird. I'm not going to jump out. But I've got another problem now. Because of all that afterburner, I was about out of gas. I had to find a tanker. Well, fortunately I found a tanker and I got on as the fuel gauge was just about to read empty. I nursed that sick thud back to Tak Lee, my home base. I had landing gear problems. I had flaps wouldn't go down, but I landed it in one piece. There were 37 holes in my 105. It had been hit everywhere except the vulnerable skin on the underbelly covering the engine. One bullet there would have ended my whole day. 4-star General George Simler came over. He wanted to hear all about the mission. He'd actually been my student when I was an instructor at Nellis, and he was a colonel, so we were talking like we were almost equals. I was a captain, he was a general. I pitched General Simler passionately that the Air Force should award the Navy Commander Trent Powers the Air Force Cross. And he liked the idea, and I thought it actually happened. Years later, I learned that he didn't get the Air Force Cross, but he got the Navy Cross. And of course, that is the second highest medal to the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross. And believe me, he earned it. LBJ once boasted, "Bring that coon skin home and hang it on the wall." Well, LBJ got his coon skin that day. Trent Powers lost his life.
The SAM threat was just one of many risks that Thud Pilots had to manage going north. The stakes continued to rise as the Soviet Union and China actively provided weapons and training to their communist comrades. The 20th century proved one important fact that every country has realized, including North Vietnam: only air power can defeat air power.
There were a lot of interesting deployments and employments of the F-100, but one that stands out in my mind is a MiG engagement that I was involved with. That's 5 April. And the prelude to that is on 4 April, we had a Navy airplane, an F-8, come in, diverted into Da Nang, and he was all shot up. So all the pilots went out to see this MiG damage, and he had a lot of holes in that F-8. But the point is, it told us that the MiGs were coming out. They were starting to play. This is the first time the MiGs started being involved with Air Force airplanes. So the next day, I was in a flight of 4 that was tasked to go up and provide MiG cap cover for the airplanes that were striking North Vietnam. They'd be setting off the coast, orbiting, saving fuel, very slow, waiting for their turn to go in and deliver ordnance. So we're up in our orbit. There was a flight of 4, and we had 2 on one end of a circle and 2 on the end of another circle. And I was flying off my lead, who was leading all this. And a lot of airframes up there, things we Air Force pilots hadn't seen, like A4, Navy A4, some F4s, Marine airplanes were up there, F-8Us, a lot of silhouettes we weren't used to looking at.
Bandit 060 at 68, orbiting. Are they black? Golly, are they black bandits? Roger, black.
I looked down at my 11 o'clock and I said to myself, there's a couple of F-86s, and I kind of looked away, and then I thought, wait a minute, there are no F-86s over here. And it was 2 MiGs in tight formation. And they were climbing up from low to high, headed towards the 2 105s that were out there, just loitering, getting ready to go in and strike. So I called these MiGs out to my leader. Now, my leader thought I was talking about 2 F-8s that were at 11 o'clock high. Now, we weren't supposed to transmit on this frequency. So he said, negative, they're friendly. And I said, negative, they're MiGs, and they're starting to head towards the orbiting airplane and airplanes, and so I had to kind of talk him onto the airplane. And by the time we let down, we were much higher than the orbiting airplanes. By the time we let down, the lead MiG was shooting at and hitting the lead F-105. In fact, just right after we arrived there, the lead F-105 went down right in the orbit area. And as we approached, I was back on lead a little bit, and the number 2 MiG was shooting at the number 2 F-105 and starting to get results. So I dove in on him, and he started the top of a loop. And we met at the top of the loop. I was going down, and I fired 233 20 Mike rounds at him, and he was coming up. So it was a very, very fast pass. I didn't see any results. I didn't think that I hit the airplane. So the number 2 F-105 declared an emergency, and we accompanied, and he was diverting back to Da Nang. And so we're flying along with him, and he had been hit again pretty heavy by this second MiG. And when we got down to just outside the DMZ, he said, flight controls are getting loose, I'm gonna have to eject. So we're down to about 6,000 feet, and we're chasing him, and we could see the canopy come off. We saw the seat come up the rails, and I was back a little bit, and I watched the seat going down, but I never saw man seat separation, and he never made it. So 2 good comrades were lost. You know, you have to live with that. War, there are no good wars. There are always losses just like this. And I always regretted, I always wondered, how could we have done better to prevent those losses?
The duty of the fighter pilot is to patrol his area of the sky and shoot down any enemy fighters in that area. Anything else is rubbish. These compelling words, spoken by Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, in 1917, are not only timeless but countryless, as they apply to anyone who straps into the cockpit of a fighter in defense of their homeland.
Robin Olds was flying the mid-cap flight, which means they had 3 flights of F-4s plus all the flights of 105s going against this railroad yard. And so we're getting into the area, and I'm flying number 3, crossbow 3. And as we starting into the area, we started hearing from Big Eye, which was a radar surveillance. Basically, they say bandits, bullseye, and it's really loud. It overcomes everything else that's going on conversation-wise. So we knew they had MIGs that day. Now, we didn't know they were 2117s or a combination.
2 bandits just west of Thud Ridge, 023 at 63, coming south.
And so the force commander immediately, got a hold of Robin, or basically said, hey, Robin, we got the MIGs up, take care of our 6. Now, generally, if you had MIGs, you did not have SAMs, which, it's sort of, it is a good thing, because the SAMs were, they're very unpredictable. And we were coming in the afternoon, and we were coming from the west. And that's important, because it's going to play out here as I go through this. And generally speaking, in fighters, if you can arrange as an attacker to come out of the sun, which, like I said, this is the afternoon, so the sun's out in the west side direction. And we were coming from the west going southeast in toward our target, which was right outside of Hanoi. It's a bridge, basically, right outside Hanoi, and there was the railroad yard, up the Northeast Railroad. And so we knew that's where the MIGs would probably be heading, and sure enough, the Big Eye started giving us vectors of which way the MIGs were going, and they were going out to the west, so we knew they were coming out there, and we assumed they were MiG-21s because that's just sort of their tactic.
Bandits just west of Thud Ridge, coming south. I just understand.
And sure enough, we get coming inbound. Now we're approaching Thud Ridge, which is a big ridge that's northwest of Hanoi, and it goes up to 5,000 feet. It sticks up. I mean, you can see it all over. If it's on a clear day, you can see it almost from probably South Vietnam. It's huge, and it was a good cover for us, and it's the way we sort of came in. Anyway, as we're coming in, the vector on the MIGs from Big Eye started getting more in line with where we're headed, and so. We continue doing what we do. And we're all looking around, of course, but we're concentrating on flying our airplanes. And also we had these WWIIs, we call them. They were ECM pods. And you had to fly a particular formation. It was like a stacked formation. And so you were sort of committed to flying formation as well as, keeping your position in the force and the flight. And so looking around was a little difficult. Just stare and crank your airplane, which normally you would be moving your airplanes so you can see behind you and so forth. But on this formation, you're sort of committed, and the F-4s were right behind my flight. As we're coming in, the Big Eye basically gave us now that they're coming in trail. And so the force commander hollered out to Robin one more time, watch for those MIGs, watch for those MIGs.
Your bandit's now about 146 degrees for 18 miles. Pulse flight, Ethan Charlie, your target's now bearing 224, 9 miles on your starboard side.
And somehow or another, as good as Robin was, and he was probably the greatest, finest combat leader that the Air Force has ever had, and pilot to boot. But somehow the MIGs got through. They were doing about 1.2 Mach, which is 1.2 times the speed of sound. They're smoking, in other words. And it's hard to see them. If you look at a MiG-21 head on, you can't really see the airplane. It's so small in the profile. So anyway, they come through and launch 2 ATOL missiles, and they knocked 2 of the F-4s down right behind my flight. So even though those poor guys got it, they probably saved our flight because we could have easily been the target. We were right at the back of force.
Anyway, the two F-4s go down. Now we got guys bailing out, beepers going off, and Mayday, 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 I'm hit, get out, get out. All this crap is going on. We ain't even gotten to the target yet. And so it really started the whole day. So now we keep on going because that's just what you do. Number one, in that particular area, there is no rest cap, which is a shame, but that's just life in that environment we worked in. You can't get SAR or rescue up there to help people if they're in that area. And so we continued on, and those guys, all that was still taking place. Robin got sort of tied up trying to see what he could do for those guys, which was nothing really, but he was trying. So we continued on, and now as we're coming in to the target area, we picked up the railroad yard, which was our target, and you roll in as a flight, basically, 1, 2, 3, and we were either 3 or 4, and I can't really remember whether we were 3rd or 4th flight in. As luck would have it, or not have it, about 15 seconds before we rolled in on the target, in a fighter you have what's called a reticle, and it's your sight that is projected up on your windscreen right in front of you, so you're looking right through it. And it's got like rings with a dot in it, and that's called the pipper. Well, that's what you use to aim with, whether it be a bombing mission or whether it be air-to-air, like MIGs or whatever. That's what you use to aim with, to help you get accuracy. Well, there's a little thing, there's about 10 cents worth of bulb that projects that sight up on your what's called a combining glass, and that's what you look through. And about 15 seconds before I roll in, all of a sudden my sight went bloop, and that little bulb had burned out. And so I didn't have any sight at all in my damn airplane, and here I'm getting ready to roll in. Well, that wasn't a big deal, really, because I've been there, done that. I had about 30 missions, Pac 6, or 50 missions, or whatever it was at the time. So, I knew the airplane, so I wasn't worried about that at that time. Later, that counted though, because the F-105 at that point in time in space in the military hardware department had probably the most sophisticated fire control system of any fighter in the world. And the 105, it was extremely accurate, deadly accurate. In fact, one of the missions right before I went to Southeast Asia, I had been on a DART mission.
This is an instrument of flight, our most advanced aerial gunnery target, known as the DART. It's the first so far that can stand the stress of supersonic flight.
And had the opportunity to shoot a DART. We had a DART and a DART spare because we were all requalifying. And I was number 2, and number 1 went in his gun jam. And then I went in and I knocked the DART down, so they brought in the DART spare. Now I'm going back on the pistol. Number 3 goes in and he misses the DART. Number 4 comes in, he misses the DART. And Bob Spielman, who was leading the flight, said, "Dave, you got anything left?" And I said, "I don't know, I might." So I went in and I shot the second DART down. But I really knew that airplane. And so I really wasn't worried about the sight anyway on the bombing run. Come down, drop my bombs, and flak's going off. You can see the red streaks going by the cockpit and all this stuff. So you get through that, and then now we're coming off the target, and you always brief a rejoin after your bombing mission, because at that point you're sort of spread out. And so we had already briefed. Hal Henning was leading the flight. And like I said, I was crossbow 3, he was crossbow 1. And so it was pre-briefed to go head north, rejoin, and then come back to the west for egress back home, back to the tank. So I'm turning in my turn to the right off the target, looking for Hal, and as I'm doing so, I looked over to the west, and there's an F-105, and he's got 2 MiG-17s trapped on his tail, and he's leading them around Hanoi. And seriously though, I mean, he was going straight and level, and I assumed he was still going around 550 knots, which we never, ever got slower than 550 knots in the Hanoi target area. And you always are cranking the airplane around and you're clearing your 6 constantly, because especially on a day when there's MiGs, and there were MiGs. We saw MiG-17s when we got to the target area. I left that out. that there were MiG-17s in the target area. We still do what I do because our mission was to hit the railroad yard. Well, this guy, I don't know whether he was trying to give them some formation practice or what, but seriously, there was 2 MiGs. Here's the 105. Here's the lead MiG. Number 2's out to the west on the right on a fighting wing position. The lead MiG is dead 6 on the 105. And he's firing at the 105. The smoke and the fire, I can still see it just like it was yesterday. It was coming out of that MiG's nose as he's shooting at the 105. And so I hollered out over the radio, 105 heading west, you got 2 MiGs on your ass, do something. Well, there's 20 105s up there, and everybody by then, normally, as soon as you come off the target, you change to squadron free. Because there's so much communication, you can't hear each other. So anyway, that didn't do any good. He's still going straight and level. So I just immediately, here I am, a dumb shit lieutenant, but I knew what to do, and I hit the panic button, which cleans off. If you see a 105, you've got big tanks, and you got a bomb rack underneath the airplane, and that cleans everything off except for the 2 outboard stations. One has an ECM pod on the right side. The left side, I had a sidewinder. Well, that would really be cool, especially didn't have a sight. And so anyway, I cleaned it off, and then I zero-G the airplane. And when you got a high wing-loaded airplane, like the 105, and you zero-G it, you take all the induced drag off the airfoils of the airplane, and it allows the airplane to really accelerate rapidly. Well, with a nose-low attitude, which I had, and zero-G, and I mean, this airspeed was really cranking because I'm full blower, wide open on that throttle. Because the guy is just, I mean, it's like seconds before he's getting shot down. And so I'm turning to the west, and I'm taking the airplane down, and I think I got somewhere around 500 feet above the ground. And I'm not even really looking at the scenery at that point, although it probably was pretty cool, especially going that fast. But I wanted to get low so I could come up on these MiGs from underneath so they wouldn't see me coming. Well, now I got the sidewinder on my left outboard, and it's just growling. It sees a heat source, which is what a heater or sidewinder, it senses an IR signature. And it's all based on heat. Well, there's this MiG-17 behind a 105 with an engine 4 times bigger than the MiG-17. I have no sight. Sure would be nice to hit the button and launch that sidewinder, but I would never have been able to live with myself had that winder gone for the 105. And so I just had to turn the volume on. It basically gives you an aural sound that lets you know it's looking at a target. Now I have no sight, have no sidewinder that's available, so I'm going in without any of that stuff, but I have one of the most beautiful guns that was ever made. It was an M61 cannon. Vulcan had fired 6,000 rounds a minute of 20 millimeter high explosive shells. So anyway, I go in and with the intention of getting these guys off of them. And as I'm coming in, I didn't know how fast I was going because I didn't look down. I was still concentrating on the MiGs and so forth. And I decided what I wanted to do is go for the right guy, roll over from him, come in on that bird, roll on him on the top of the lead. Seemed like a good plan at the time. And then as I'm getting closer, all of a sudden, something in this little lieutenant's brain starts saying, "You got one hell of a closure rate, Lieutenant." And so I looked down, I was doing 1.3 Mach, which was basically 1,000 miles an hour, if you really equate the altitude and the airspeed. So I said, oh my God. So I pull the throttle back, I pop the speed brakes, and I'm rolling over to the second outboard MiG, and I start pulling on him, and I see I'm going to overshoot, so I pull harder and harder and harder. And I pulled about 8.5 Gs, but very smoothly. And as I'm coming up on the MiG, I opened up my cannon, but I'm a rocket ship at this point. So I fire and I hit the MiG in the wing. It doesn't show up on the film or anything, but I hit him in the wing, and now I'm going ballistic, and I go to about 10,000, 12,000 feet. And then I roll over, and I'm upside down, looking down. There's a bunch of clouds. I'd actually gone through some clouds. And right out from underneath this this bunch of clouds. Here comes a MiG-17. This airplane right here, except it was silver. This is not the one. It's the same airplane, but mine was silver. So I pulled down on this guy, and like I said, I'd fired a lot of dart. I really knew the airplane. I lowered my nose, and I opened up, and the first bullets went right into the fuselage of the airplane. Unfortunately, they went right through the cockpit. And so the guy never got out, and he just did a slow roll over. And he was full burner now. This one, actually, by the way, when I first came up on him, the 105 was going so damn slow, they didn't even have to have their afterburner. Well, this one had his afterburner, because now I had busted up their whole program. And he just rolled over and hit the ground. And so I'm coming out, and now I'm looking at my fuel gauges, and they're starting to say, Lieutenant, you better watch out. You're pretty low on gas. So anyway, I shot up to about 35,000 feet, and I called Hal up on the radio, because I couldn't even talk when all this was going on. I never said anything what was going on. I said, Hal, I got a damn MiG, I got a MiG. So anyway, that's just part of the fighter business. And we going up on the tanker, and then I drop in, get my gas, I'm okay, and got home, and first question everybody asked was, did the guy get out? And that was that common bond, enemy versus each other. There's still respect for the driver, for the pilots. About 10 years ago, a friend of mine that I flew with at Talcali, Mo Baker, he was in the 357th with me, and I'd flown him a lot. Well, he was shot down the morning of the 23rd and was a POW, and he shared a cell with a guy who's a close friend of his was in our intel division. And they're the ones that monitored the radio frequencies. They are the ones that read all the secret documents that they could get their hands on. Well, after the war, he'd gotten into the Vietnamese culture and really and went over there a lot and read a lot of their stuff. Well, he was reading a magazine. This is about 12 years ago. He was reading some article in a newspaper or magazine, whatever, and they was talking about they were cutting a new road in north of Hanoi. And in the process, they ran across aircraft wreckage. So the protocol was to turn it over to the Defense Department, because it could be live ordnance. Who knows, you know. So the military excavates the site. They found the remnants of a MiG-17. In the MiG-17, they found partial fragments of a body, you know, the bones and stuff like that, which would be expected. But they also found a wallet. The wallet was totally readable. They took it back to what they call the House of Records and went through the documents. It was belonged to Le Van Phong, who was shot down August 23rd, 1967. And that was my kill. And anyway, Mo Baker, his friend, he called and told him about this and sent this article to him. And Mo knew that was my kill. And so he calls me one Saturday afternoon. I'm in my basement working on an old Porsche I've got. And he said, "What are you doing, Dave?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, sit your ass down, Lieutenant." And we always had that rapport. It was one of those fun things. And so I did, and I said, "What's up, Mo?" And he said, "Well, I got something to tell you." And he told me the story. And he said, "What's your email?" So I told him. And so he sent me the whole article. And honestly, guys, that was probably one of the weirdest Saturday afternoons I've ever spent, emotionally. But he was 1 year older than I was, and he was doing for his country what I was doing for mine. It's sort of weird, I know, but it's just the irony was, here I am. I've got the fighter with the most sophisticated fire control system in the world. Had I had the sight, I was good enough. I could put that pipper on any part of that airplane, because he did not know I was there. I came in on him. I did everything right in that respect, and I could have put that pipper on any part of that airplane, and that's where if I pulled the trigger, that's what I'd hit, and I would have gone for the engine or the wing. As it turned out, in a way, I was too good at it, and I bore-sighted the cockpit, not knowing it, but that's where everything went, and it took him out. And if I had my way, he could have punched out. Granted, he would have come back another day and been against us, but that's how I was taught. So what I did, I had the opportunity this past fall of going over to Hanoi. A bunch of us that had air-to-air engagements went over to Hanoi, and we actually met our Vietnamese counterparts that flew engagements against us. And it was one of the coolest things that I could have ever been a part of. And what I did is I made up a plaque. I used one of my patches, the 105 patches, and a name tag that I actually used when I was flying combat. And I made this plaque and presented it in his honor.
We're going against one of the bridges in North Vietnam, and it was a very clear day, so everything appeared closer. So I can tell that my squadron commander, Colonel McDonald, is going to the next bridge.
About 30 seconds. Roger, I'm heading east right now, going up the river.
So I'm here on his wing. I'm number 3. I said, hey, Bear 3 has got the target at 11 o'clock, 3 miles. Bear 3's got the target at 10:30, 3 miles. Bear 3's got the target at 9 o'clock a half. I'm rolling in over the top.
I'm down low, 3 and 4, stay high. See back in the hills, it looks like there's a mix behind it. 3 and 4, 37.
And I roll in like this, and the first thing I see is a couple of MIGs about 2 miles away. I think, wow, MIGs. I try to hold the nose up, and the airplane just says, I'm going down to bomb. So
there was a plan where we were going to go against a bridge, and the plan was roll in opposite directions. Powhatty's told the story a whole lot better than me, but what I'd like to emphasize is that we roll in, we're looking across at other aircraft rolling in the exact opposite direction.
Down I go, and here's another airplane coming down that rolled in where it was supposed to. And we see each other at the same time. We both jink up and then back down again to the target, and we jink up again, I think about 3 jinks, and we finally pass each other and drop our bombs. I later learned it's Neely Johnson, and we both laughed about it later. We're still laughing about it even now. But
and bombs coming off, and we're wondering whether we're going to get through this or not.
3 o'clock, Hey, Orange. I got 2 bogeys, about 6 o'clock. Okay, they're shooting down there now.
But which way we're going to go, but we avoided a midair, and that's what lasted.
A damn good airplane, and we're privileged to have flown it. Privileged to have flown it.
I flew 100 missions in the Thud. As an Air Force pilot, you fly airplanes that affect your future and affect your life, and this is one of them.
3,000-pound bomb, my favorite ordnance. This doesn't have the fuse extenders. The fuse extenders made it really wonderful, and so they told us, don't drop them in anything except both together. Well, both together, they made the same hole. So I dropped them in ripple, which required you to hold the pickle button down a little bit longer, and they'd come out in trail. And when they came out in trail, they made a really god-awful smash. And you always knew when you were going to have fun that the Raven Fact said, oh, Mark 118s, what are those? Because they like to get close. We flipped one guy right on his back getting too close to the concussion. So this was a favorite ordnance of mine.
Roger, nearest friendlies are 2,000 meters to the west. Okay. You still have my smoke? I got your smoke still, right. Map 2 on cinema pod in pairs. 2, Roger.
And I also had other releases that they didn't like. 1,500, 15 degree dive, 1,500 feet, and Mark's 118s, 760s, and well, the only thing you had to do is turn away from the frag or you were going to catch something. So you could obliterate a low altitude target in the weather. And then the other one I did is I changed the settings on a CBU to avoid
dudding them because the weather was bad. I changed it from 6 seconds to 4 seconds because I knew the weather was bad. I got into the clouds, got my canopy up there against the clouds, bunted, released, got the target, had 1/3 the BDA from all of Southeast Asia, and guess what? I got my ass chewed by the wing weapons officer. You changed the settings on the CBU. I said, yeah, but they were going to dud. You can't do that. So that was my, several of my stories that can be told that are fit for PG audience.
Max Hatcher, little round guy like me. Well, we weren't little round guys back then. We were 165 pounds, and we were small in stature, but we were pretty good sticks. He and I and Ken North and Leon Garner went up to the Langmet Highway Bridge on the Northeast Rail Line, way up past Kep. And fairly deep in, we went off in about Haiphong and went into that target to pop up. Ken North was flying 3, but he had boarded for a bad airplane, so we sent him home. So the 3 of us went in and popped up, and I had popped up directly over the target. So there I looked down, and there was plenty of flak. They had 85s all around there. So I just turned south down the rail line and just kind of ducked in for a second. I told Leon and Max, who were here, I said, we're going to go 15 seconds and we're going to do a split S attack. So I went 15 seconds down the rail line, rolled over, pulled through one of my best passes. All those 4 things I told you about, dive angle, airspeed, altitude, and sight picture, they all came together right there. Pickled off 2 3,000 pounders, jinked once right, jinked back left, looked back. Leon said, you got it. I said, all right. Max, take those 85s on the east side. So he bombed these 85 millimeters on the east side. And to the Leon, take the approach.
Okay, position off. Let's go. I'm with you.
He knocked the approach off. Well, when we came off, we scattered. They finally caught me somewhere towards Haiphong, going out to the brown anchor, the refueling track that was out over the Gulf. But a single 105 was out in the distance, so I rocked my wings and he came sailing up beside me, and it was a guy from one of the other squadrons. He took his mask up. Yeah, you can go with us. Come on, we're going home. That was one of the better missions. Like I say, I got credit for this getting shot down in 99, and my 100th was in the HU-16. So when I got picked up, that was their first flight. We got shot up pretty heavily in the water. I had a hole through my left arm, my legs were mangled, so I wasn't going to walk anywhere. It was probably a good thing that I came down in the water. Well, after we got airborne and out of there and heading out, he said, what was that? I said, 99. He said, I'm an instructor pilot in this airplane. I'm going to give you 20 minutes in this airplane for 100. So my Form 5, my record of flight is 105, 105, 105. HU-16, 20 minutes, 0122 rest cap. So that was my last ride in the 105. Good takeoff, bad landing.
Nose art on combat aircraft has been around since man began fighting each other in the air. Often initiated by pilots as a good luck charm for them and their aircraft in combat, nose art took on a life of its own in every war, with some images earning a rightful place in history. Would be no different in Vietnam, with one exception. One legendary nose art became an air-to-air refueling utility.
My name is Pussy Galore.
Derived from the James Bond movie, Goldfinger, Vic Vizcarra devised a solution to the problem the boom operators were having navigating the air refueling probe into the F-105 receptacle. By painting nose art of a nude woman strategically placed over the refueling receptacle, the problem was not only immediately solved, but became one of the biggest morale boosters in Southeast Asia. After all, air-to-air refueling was not only necessary, but critical for the air war in Vietnam to be conducted.
My story is really not about in the combat zone, it's coming out of the combat zone. We're a flight of 4 F-105s across the Mekong going into Orange Anchor for refueling. I will leave the flight lead name anonymous on this, but I'm number 2. Sid Wise is number 3 and Frank Bernard is number 4. Coming in about 1,000 feet below the tanker and Dobbin flight, a flight of 2 F-4s, are on the tanker. Dobbin 2 is actually on the boom, and Dobbin 1 is on the wing. But we're behind the tanker about 1,000 feet, and Dobbin Flight drops down and straight ahead off of the tanker, which means that's the way they're separating from the tanker. So we are cleared into the boom area and on the tanker. And I'm going to use my fingers here. This is me, number 2. That's the flight lead. This is Sid Wise, number 3, and that's Frank Bernard, number 4. As we go into the tanker, Dobbin 2 goes to full power on the F4, drops down and straight ahead. We hit the jet wash and of the F4, and what it does, and I'll use my hands like all fighter pilots do, what it does is it rolls the flight lead into the element. And as the flight lead rolls into the element, number 3, Sid Wise, attempts to get out of the way and strikes number 4. Number 4 flames fireball. Number 3, Sid, has most of his left wing, right wing damaged. And I am now the flight lead because the flight lead itself went down straight towards the ground, looked like a split S towards the ground after he finished his roll, and I assumed that he had crashed as well.
We were coming back from a mission over Laos at the time. We'd already gotten rid of our bombs. We were coming up on a tanker to refuel. And we had a flight lead that wasn't particularly experienced. He was an old guy, but not too experienced, and ended up kind of putting us in a bad position, and ended up with number 3 and number 4, and I was number 4 of the flight out on this fingertip. Ended up colliding. They took my airplane, as it turned out later on. We had an eyewitness, Tim Peters, who was on he's also a lieutenant on the other wing. Saw the stuff happen. And if you look at the airplane here, right behind the cockpit, it split the airplane. So of course I'm sitting in the cockpit part of this thing. The rest of the airplane is a piece of junk disappearing somewhere. It had knocked the canopy off the airplane at the time. So I'm tumbling through the air. I don't know this. I was knocked out, knocked my helmet off. The canopy's gone. The airplane is tumbling, and we're getting a few flames in the cockpit. So I'm burning, and I'm saying, well, it's time to get out of here. And I had time to think about it a little bit. I was off the seat. We had a rocket ejection seat that if you fire this thing and you're not firmly in the seat, you're going to break your back. And I said, well, I'm looking down at the time, and I'm looking at that point, we had a seat belt, which was a lever. You could pull this lever, and it would release. And so I look down, I pull this thing, and it pops me out of the thing. So now I'm tumbling through the air in one direction. I could sort of see this little piece tumbling the other way, and we'd been taught to spread eagle if this happens. So I spread eagle in the air, and all of a sudden I'm coming down like this. My helmet had been knocked off. I'd been burned. My face was burned. Arm was burned. I'm going 100 miles an hour down, and I'm trying to find my parachute, and I can't see it, of course, because you got this slipstream in your eyes. But I grab it and I pull it. Now I'm in the parachute floating down, probably at 15,000 feet. So I had a long way down, and after that it was pretty routine. I think I can recall seeing 1 or 2 airplanes zooming around. It was the guy in the other wing, Tim Peters, who was coordinating the rescue at that point. There wasn't much I could do. I think I may have pulled out my survival radio and called in and said, hey, Bear 4, I've bailed out, I'm okay, I'm down. Got down into the jungle, parachute caught in a tree. It ended up released from the tree, so I fell out of the tree. Fell backwards over the survival kit at that point, and actually ended up breaking a bone in my back. I was still mobile. Walked around, got the radio out, started talking to people. A helicopter showed up that Tim had arranged for, and off we went. Got into the helicopter, took us over to Korat Air Force Base.
I run the rescue. I look back, I see Sid Wise eject out of his airplane in a big, wide, sweeping right-hand turn. Behind Sid, I can also, as I'm turning, I can see Frank Bernard's airplane, which was sliced in half by Sid's wing, and is now pretty much a Roman candle. The end of the story is that we rescue Sid Wise, and Frank Bernard, who I assumed when I landed had perished in the accident. As it turned out, I shut down on the runway because of low gas, and the wing commander came up, congratulated me on a successful rescue and said we got them both.
I can remember being on a helicopter being really, really ticked at the guy who was the flight lead, who basically had caused the accident. There wasn't much you could do about it at that point. And I walked off the helicopter, they laid me down on a gurney, shot me immediately with something. And it was probably a day later where I woke up. And I was reasonably okay. I burned a little bit, but nothing really dramatic. So that was kind of my story.
And I was very surprised to find out that Frank Bernard had survived the accident. The flight lead had returned to Takli. He had recovered the airplane at very low altitude and flew back to Takli.
One F-105 target in Hanoi was so critical and famous, a painting of the mission sits honorably on display in a presidential library and museum. The Paul Doomer Bridge spanned more than a mile long and was key in supplying the enemy forces in South Vietnam and Laos. It was surrounded by AAA guns, ranging from 37mm to 100mm, SAMs, and MIGs at nearby fields. The Thud was the weapon of choice to take out the bridge.
It was just a bridge. It was a symbol. The symbol of the toughest, biggest bridge we had to go after. And I was fortunate enough to be on the first grade. We just dumped a whole bunch of 750s and 3,000 pounders on that baby. We got a hole in it anyway, and then follow-on flights finished the job for us. But once in a while we run into a big black smokestacks in the sky. We knew the gray ones were 57mm and the black ones were 85mm. It was a political war. In the 10-mile radius we had to avoid around Hanoi. God knows why. LBJ's war, I guess, huh? And they finally opened that 10-mile ring for us, and that's when we went in. But I just remember telling myself, I'm going to write a song. So I wrote a song. I said, Chip,
give us the lyrics, the first lyrics.
We got a little place, South Ridge. Name of the place is the Doomer Bridge. You take the MIGs, I'll take the flak. Gonna show you where it's at. Staggered at bed at 3:30. Flight surgeon said, you look bad to me. I'm remembering guys. I don't like to remember guys. There's all the guys that did not come back. And thank God for the ones that did. After they were captured, POWs, they did come back. Thank God for them. I finished up my 100 missions out of Takli and Karat too. I was in 5 different squadrons, TDY out down there out of Yokota, where I was assigned permanently. But I went down on a 30-day TDY and came back 100 days later. I said, bullshit, I'm going home without my 100.
When the Vietnam-era War started in 1964, the best of the greatest generation who saved the world in World War II were called upon once again to fight for their country. Proven fighter pilots who were masters of the skies over Europe 20 years earlier now found themselves leading tactical fighter wings in Southeast Asia. Triple aces like Robin Olds and the United States' highest living ace, Clarence Bud Anderson. We're in a different battle space now, not only in terms of airspeed and sophisticated weapons, but a very different nonsensical warfighting mindset from their commander-in-chief.
I stayed in the Army Air Corps after the war for 7 years, and then we joined the United States Air Force, stayed in it and finished out 30 years in the military. But I got into the early jets, and I went off to Okinawa and joined the 18th TAC Fighter Wing as a full colonel. I was the director of operations, the vice commander, and then the commander of the 18th Fighter Wing unit of F-105s. And I'd flown them somewhat in flight testing. The war was going on in Southeast Asia. Engaged in combat over North Vietnam, battle damage repair. It was, like I said, the busiest thing I had to do in the Air Force. And I tell you, one thing I want to talk about was the most difficult job I ever had to do as a wing commander was to go, when we had a combat loss, was to go in and knock on the widow's door and tell her husband's not coming home tonight. That's a very difficult job. I fully expected to go to Southeast Asia. I'm combat ready on the equipment, a very logical place for me to go. But no, you've got to go back to the Pentagon. I'd gone one time before in the Pentagon, had a great job in a general slot, and they came around and asked me if I would like to go to Southeast Asia. It took me about 3 milliseconds to say, yeah, I'll go. And so I went to Southeast Asia. The war is winding down now. Oh, and I had experience with the policies that we were up against in Southeast Asia from being on Okinawa with our units flying down there on TDY. So now I'm in Southeast Asia. I'm a wing commander. I've got 3 F-105 squadrons, 1 Wild Weasel squadron, and a B-66 electronic warfare squadron in my wing at Takli. Not a popular war. We didn't have our whole country behind it like World War II. You know, they call this the greatest generation. But I think what happened in World War II was when Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, it totally changed the attitude of America. It was a war that had to be fought, you know. These dictators were going to conquer their part of the world, and sooner or later, the United States is going to be involved in a big way, and maybe sooner than later was better. It just united the country, got the whole country behind the war. We had young men going to Canada before the war to they were going into flight training there and going over and helping the Royal Air Force. As opposed to later on, when some of our young men went to Canada to get out of the war. What a difference. The Vietnam War, it's not popular with the total population. We had anti-war groups, demonstrations. Not a good time. My peers said, why in the hell are you even thinking of going? You know, I could retire. I didn't have to go. The guy said I could stay in my job. He just said, do you want to go? Oh, they told me morale was bad. The war was over there. We're fighting the war with both hands tied behind our back. It was being micromanaged, starting with the president and the McNamara, who ran the Department of Defense, micromanaging the actual combat, what the targets were going to be the next day, rules of engagement. You can't bomb Hanoi, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't attack the MIG fields. Incredible things. It was like, do we want to win this war? And so my peers said, hey, you dumbass, you might even get killed, number one. And why do you want to be burdened with all these problems when you got 2 years to go for mandatory retirement? And I got over there, and I'm so glad I did, because I found out that we still had young men in there that wanted to serve their country and wanted to do what was right. You know, years later, when we get rid of McNamara, and we had Desert Storm 1 and Desert Storm 2, and a president that said hey, you guys, here's what I want you to do. You plan it, you execute it, and what a difference. And what a difference in our country when we showed some patriotism for a change. And I found out that the guys in my Air Force, very proud of them, because they did a great job.
Unlike the war fought by the greatest generation, the air war fought over North Vietnam was reported around the world as nothing but a mistake. No war in American history is more misunderstood than what took place over the bloody skies of Vietnam in the 1960s. The Vietnam War was misreported then, and it is misremembered now. Men of honor and integrity did not fight because they liked it. They answered the call of their country, like so many generations before them. One of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century, Stuart Mill, once said, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. A man who has nothing which he is willing to fight for, nothing which he cares about more than he does about his personal safety, is a miserable creature who has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself." There's a special kind of respect reserved for these men who served in the most difficult times when everything was against them. Some of the incredible heroes who participated in the first Thud Pilots film and the sequel have already passed to join their Thud brethren killed in action in heaven. Veterans of valor should never become just a faded memory. We owe it to them to preserve history so they will always be remembered.